So, hello and welcome back to chapter 2 of our new series, The Protector of the Small, where we met Caladri, who is a 10-year-old, I think either 9 or 10, and her desire is to be a knight, just like Alana, and also a protector, like her mother was. We got to see a dream that she had that was a dream of something that had actually happened to her when she was very small. It sounds like her family, at least the younger ones, not the older ones who were already in training to be knights, her older brothers, but her and her parents, at the very least, were basically ambassadors to the country of Yamini, which is, from the way it's described in all of the books, it's something like Japan or China in the Tortolan universe. So, they are very stoic people, and it does seem like they're females are allowed to be some sort of warriors because nobody seemed to mind that her mom picked up the naginata and thrashed the people that were trying to steal one of the national treasures. And that was actually, it sounds like, when Kel really decided she was going to be like just like her mom. And then she probably heard about Alana after that and was like, yes, I'm going to be a knight. So that is her dream. Although, unfortunately, she did find out that unlike all of the other pages in all of history before her, she is going to be subjected to a 1 year trial period. Because it sounds like Lord Wildon, who is the training master, doesn't think that girls can be warriors. He is very dead set against it, and for whatever reason, King Jonathan has acquiesced to this whole trial period thing, which kind of made Alana a little bit mad. In fact, Alana went stalking off, and sounds like she was rightfully very angry because she's not even going to be allowed to speak to Caladri, just so that nobody can say that she gave her any extra help. So interesting. But after a very traumatic experience at the river with a rogue spider in, which honestly would have just traumatized me to no end, that has strengthened Kel's resolve, and she has said, you know what? Wrong-headed or not, fair or not, she's going to be a knight because she is never going to let anything like that happen again. And that is where we kind of left it, with Caladri heading off to become a page. On a personal note, it's not really cold out. I mean, it's definitely not cold. The heater hasn't even kicked on. I have not turned off the heater yet. I usually don't turn off the furnace until nights have been consistently in at least the 60s for a couple of weeks. And we aren't there yet, although it hasn't been turning on at night or anything. But I like to just kind of have that extra little insurance that if it is really cold, the furnace will kick on. But yeah, we got a little bit chillier, which is why I'm wearing a sweater and a long sleeve shirt, because I am a giant baby who acclimates to the weather far too quickly. And I think it's probably like 58, 57, 58 degrees, which a couple of weeks ago, 57 or 58 degrees, I would have been sweating. Now 57 or 58 degrees, and I'm like, I'm a little bit chilly. So, still no word on the whole dental thing. I've been trying to get a hold of one dental office and have not been having any luck. I think it's the biggest deal with places up here because there aren't that many dental offices up here, and a lot of them aren't taking new patients, even if you have really good insurance. I have no insurance, so that makes it even harder. I'm like, look, you yank the tooth, I give you money. That's how this works, but evidently that's not always how it works. On a good note, I have moderated my eating, so I have not had pain in the last 3 days. Knocking on wood. I've been having a lot of soup. It's a good thing I like soup anyway, but I've been having a lot of soup and scrambled eggs. Things that are soft and don't really cause any sorts of pain, and then you eat and immediately go brush your teeth. And that seems to be working. Crossing my fingers. Pain sucks. I don't enjoy it. So, but like I said, seemed to be the last 3 days at least, and knocking on wood one more time, haven't been like in pain, which does a whole lot for your outlook. Like being in pain is terrible, and not being in pain is wonderful. So I will take the not being in pain thing as I continue to see what I can do to actually deal with the issue. But none of that has anything to do with this book. So let us jump back into chapter 2 of First Test, book 1 of Protector of the Small by Tamora Pierce. Not so welcome. Wilden of Caval nodded to Baron Piers, but his eyes were on Kell. He looked her over from top to toe, taking in every wrinkle and spot in her tunic and breeches and the fading bruise around her eye. Kell met his gaze squarely. The training master was handsome, for all that he was completely bald on top. He wore what was left of his light brown hair cropped very, very short. A scar, so red and puffy that it had to be recent, went from the corner of his eye across his right temple and dug a track through his hair to his ear. His right arm was in a sling. His eyes were brown, his mouth was wide, his chin was square with a hint of a cleft. His big hands were covered in scars. He dressed simply, in a pale blue tunic, a white shirt, and dark blue hose. She couldn't see his feet behind the big desk, but she suspected that his shoes were as sensible as the rest of him. Even the Yaminis would say that he's got too much stone in him, she thought, looking at the scuffed toes of her boots. He needs some water to balance his nature. Peering through her eyelashes at the training master, she thought, lots of water. A century or two of it, maybe. Wilden drummed his fingers on his desktop. At last he smiled tightly. Be seated, both of you, please. Kell and her father obeyed. Wilden took his own seat. Well, Keldry, is it? She nodded. You understand that you are here on sufferance. You have a year in which to prove that you can keep up with the boys. If you do not satisfy me on that count, you will go home. He's never said that to any boy, Kell thought, happy that her face would not show her resentment. He shouldn't be saying it to me. She kept her voice light and pleasant and said, Yes, my lord. You will get no special privileges or treatment despite your sex. Wilden's eyes were stony. I will not tolerate flirtations. If there is a boy in your room, the door must be open. The same is true if you are in a boy's room. Should you disobey, you will be sent home immediately. Kell met his eyes. Yes, sir. She was talkative enough with her family, but never with outsiders, and the chill that rose from Lord Wilden was making her even quieter. Her father shifted in his seat. My daughter is only 10, Lord Wilden. She's a bit young for that kind of thing. My experience with females is that they begin early, said the training master. He ran a blunt-tipped finger down a piece of paper. It says here that you claim no magical gift. Is that so? Kell nodded. Lord Wilden put down the paper and leaned forward, clasping his hands on his neat desk. In your father's day, the royal household always dined in the banquet hall. Now, our royal family dines privately for the most part. On great holidays and special occasions, feasts are held with the sovereigns, nobles, and guests in attendance. The pages are required to serve at such banquets. Also, you are required to run errands for any lord or lady who asks. Does she have a servant with her? Lord Wilden asked Kell's father. No. Very well. Palace staff will tend to her rooms. Have you any questions? Yes, she wanted to say. Why don't you treat me like you do the boys? Why can't you be fair? But she kept that to herself. Growing up in a diplomat's house, she had learned how to read people. A good look at Lord Wilden's square, stubborn face with its hard jaw had told Kell that words would mean nothing to the man. She would have to prove to him that she was as good as any boy, and she would. No questions, my lord, she said quietly. There's a chamber across the hall for your farewells, said Lord Wilden to her father. Salma will come for Kelladry and guide her to her assigned room. No doubt her baggage is already there. Then he looked at Kell. Unpack your things neatly. When the supper bell rings, stand in the hall with the new boys. Sponsors, older pages who show the new ones how things are done, must be chosen before we go to the mess. After Kell said goodbye to her father, she found Salma waiting for her in the hall. The woman was short and thin with frizzy brown hair and big dark eyes. She wore the palace uniform for women servants, a dark skirt and a white blouse. A large ring, laden with keys, hung from her belt. As she took Kell to her new room, Salma asked if Kell had brought a personal servant. When Kell replied that she hadn't, Salma told her, In that case, I'll assign a servant to you. We bring you hot water for washing and to get your fire going in the morning, and so on. And if you play tricks on the servants, you'll do your own laundry and bed making for the rest of the year. It's not our job to look after weapons, equipment, or armor, mind you. That's what you're here to learn. She briskly led the way through one long hall as she talked. Now they passed a row of doors. Each bore a piece of slate with a name written in chalk. That's my room, said Salma, pointing. The ground floor here is the page's wing. Squires are the next floor up. If you need supplies or special cleaning and sewing, or if you're ill, come to me. Kell looked at her curiously. My brothers didn't mention you. Timon Greendale, our headman, reorganized the services here 6 years ago, said Salma. I was brought in 5 years back, just in time to meet your brother Connell. Don't worry, I won't hold him against you. Kell smiled. Connell had that effect on people. Salma halted in front of the last door in the hall. There was no name on the slate. This is your room, she remarked. I told the men to put your things up here. She brushed the slate with her fingertips. Your name has been washed off. I'll have to get my chalk. You might as well unpack. Thank you, said Kell. No need to thank me. I do what they pay me to do. She hesitated and then said, If you need anything, even if it's just a sympathetic ear, you tell me. She rested her hand on Kell's shoulder for a moment, then walked away. Entering her room, Kell shut the door. When she turned, a gasp escaped before she closed her lips. She surveyed the damage. The narrow bed was overturned. Mattresses, sheets, and blankets were everywhere. The drapes were on the floor and the shutters were hanging open. 2 chairs, a bookcase, a pair of night tables, and an oak clothes press had also been upended. The desk must have been too heavy for such treatment, but its drawers had been dumped out onto the floor. Her packs were open, their contents were tumbled out. Someone had used her practice gave to slash and pull down the wall hangings. On the wall, she saw written, "No girls, go home. You won't last." Kel took deep breaths until the storm of hurt and anger that filled her was under control. Once that was done, she began to clean up. The first thing that she checked was the small wooden box containing her collection of Yamini porcelain Lucky Cats. She had a dozen or so, each a different size and color, each one sitting one paw raised up. The box itself was dented on one corner, but the contents were safe. Her mother had packed each cat in a handkerchief to keep it from breaking. Well, that's something at least, thought Kel. But what about next time? Maybe she should just ship them home. As she gathered her clothes, she heard a knock. She opened her door just a crack, and it was Salma. The moment the woman saw her face, she knew something was wrong. "Open up," she commanded. Kel let her in and closed the door. "You were warned this kind of thing might happen?" said Salma finally. Kel nodded. "I'm cleaning up." "I told you, it's your job to perform a warrior's tasks. We do this kind of work," said Salma. "Leave this to me. By the time you come back from supper, it'll be good as new. Are you going to change clothes?" Kel nodded. "Well then, why don't you do that? It's near time for you to wait outside. I'll need your key once you're done in here." Kel scooped up the things that she needed, and she walked into the next room. Small and empty, it served as a dressing room and a bathing room. The privy was behind a door that was set into the wall. There was little here to destroy, but the mirror and privy seat had been soaped. Kel shut the door. Before she had seen her room, she had been planning to wear a tunic and breeches, just as she had for the journey. She had thought if she were to train as a boy, she should dress like one. They were also more comfortable. Now she felt differently. She was a girl. She had nothing to be ashamed of, and they had better learn that first thing. And the best way to remind them was to dress at least part of the time as a girl. Stripping off her travel-stained clothing, she pulled on a yellow linen shift, and she topped it with her second best dress, a fawn brown cotton that looked good against the yellow. She removed her boots and put on white stockings and brown leather slippers. Cleaning the mirror, she looked at herself. The gown was creased from being packed, but that couldn't be helped. She still had a black eye, and there was nothing she could do with her mouse brown hair. She had had it cropped to her earlobes before leaving home. Next trip to market, maybe I'll get some ribbons, she thought, running a comb through her hair. Nice bright ribbons. Then she smiled at her own folly. Hadn't she learned by now that the first thing a boy grabbed in a fight was hair? She would lose chunks or get half choked if she wore ornaments and ribbons. Over her head, a bell clanged 3 times, and she winced. It was loud. "Time," Salma called. If she thought anything of the change in Kel's appearance, she kept it to herself. Instead, she pointed to yet another piece of writing. "Girls can't fight." Salma's mouth twisted. "And what do they think their mothers do when the great lords are at war and out in raiding parties? Stay in their solars and just tat lace?" That made Kel smile. "My aunt lit barrels of lard and had them catapulted onto Scarnan ships just this summer." "As would any delicately reared noblewoman," said Salma. She opened the door. Once they had walked into the hall, she took the key from Kel and went about her business, nodding to the boys as they came out of their rooms. Kel stood in front of her door and clasped her hands so that no one could see them shaking. Suddenly she wanted to turn tail and run till she got back home. Lord Wilden was coming down the hall. Boys joined him as he passed, talking quietly. One of them was a boy with white blonde hair and bright blue eyes, set in a face as rosy-cheeked as a girl. Kel, seeing the crispness of his movements and a stubbornness around his mouth, guessed that anyone silly enough to mistake that one for a girl would be quickly taught their mistake. A big, cheerful-looking red-headed boy walked on Wilden's left, joking with a very tall, lanky young man. A step behind the blonde page and Wilden came a tall boy who walked with a lion's arrogance. He was brown-skinned and black-eyed. His nose had a proud arch to it. A Bazir tribesman from the southern desert, Kel guessed. She saw several other Bazir amongst the pages, but none looked as kingly as this one. When the training master halted, there were only 5 people left in front of the doors on both sides of him. 4 boys and Kel. Her next-door neighbor, a brown-haired boy liberally sprinkled with freckles, bowed to Lord Wilden. Kel and the others did the same. Then Kel wondered if she should have curtsied. She let it go. To do so now, after having bowed, would just make her look silly. Wilden looked at each of them in turn, his eyes resting longest on Kel. Don't think you'll have an easy time this year. You will work hard. You'll work when you're tired. You'll work when you're ill, and when you think you can't possibly work anymore. You have 1 more day to laze. Your sponsor will show you around this palace and collect the things that the crown supplies to you. The day after that, we begin. You, he pointed to a boy with the reddest, straightest hair Kel had ever seen. Your name and the holdings of your family. The boy stammered. Merrick, sir? My lord, Merrick of Hollyrose? He had pale blue eyes and a long, broad nose, and his skin had only the barest summer tan. The training master looked at the pages around him. Which of you older pages will sponsor Merrick and teach him our ways? Please, Lord Wilden. Kel was not able to see the owner of the voice in the knot of boys that were standing at Wilden's back. We're kinsmen, Merrick and me. And kinsmen should stick together. Well said, Faileron of Kingsreach. A handsome, dark-haired boy came to stand with Merrick, smiling at the redhead. Wilden pointed to the freckled lad, Esmond of Nicoline, who was taken into the charge of Cleon of Kennan, the big redhead. Blonde, impish Quilden of Marty's Hill was sponsored by the regal-looking Bazir, Zahir ibn Alaz. The next pairing was the most notable. Crown Prince Rold, the 12-year-old heir to the throne, chose to show Seaver of Tarside around. Seaver, whose dark complexion and coal-black eyes and hairs suggested Bazir ancestors, stared at Rold nervously, but he relaxed when the prince rested a hand on his shoulder. Now only Kel remained. Wilden looked around and demanded, Your name and fief? She gulped. Keladry of Middelin. Who will sponsor her? The handsome Zahir looked at her and sniffed. Girls have no business in the affairs of men. This one should go home. He glared at Kel, who met his eyes calmly. Lord Wilden shook his head. We are not among the Bazir tribes, Zahir ibn Alaz. Moreover, I requested a sponsor and not an opinion. He looked at the other boys. Will no one offer? No beginner may go unsponsored. Look at her, Kel heard a boy murmur. She stands there like a lump. The blond youth at Wilden's side raised a hand. May I, my lord, he said. Lord Wilden stared. You, Joran of Stone Mountain? The youth bowed. I would be pleased to teach the girl all she needs to know of life in the page's wing. Kel looked at him, suspicious. From the way a few of the older pages giggled, she suspected Joran might plan to chase her away, not show her around. She looked at the training master, expecting him to agree. Instead, Lord Wilden frowned. I had hoped for another sponsor, he said stiffly. You should employ your spare hours in the improvement of your classwork and writing skills. I thought Joran hated, someone whispered. Shut up, another boy hissed. Kel looked at the stones under her feet. Now she was fighting to hide embarrassment, but knew she was failing. Any Yamini would see her shame on her features. She clasped her hands in front of her and schooled her features to smoothness. I'm a rock, she thought. I am stone. I believe I can perfect my studies and sponsor the girl, said Joran. And since I'm the only volunteer... Well, I suppose I'm being rash and peculiar again, someone remarked in a drawl. But if it means helping my friend Joran improve his studies, well, I'll just have to sacrifice myself. There's nothing I won't do to further the cause of book learning amongst my peers. Everyone turned towards the speaker, who stood at the back of the group. Seeing him clearly, Kel thought that he was too old to be a page. He was tall, fair-skinned, and lean, with emerald eyes and light brown hair that swept back away from a widow's peak. Lord Wilden absent-mindedly rubbed the arm that he kept tucked into a sling. You volunteer, Neelan of Queensgrove? The youth bowed. Why, that I do, your worship, sir. There was the barest hint of mockery in Neelan's educated voice. A sponsor should be a page in his second year at least, said Wilden. And you will mind your tongue. Oh, I know I only joined this happy little band in April, your lordship, the young Neelan said. But I have lived at court almost all my 15 years. I know the palace and its ways, and, unlike Joran, I need not worry about my academics. Kel stared at this boy. Had he always been mad, or did a few months under Wilden do this to him? She had just arrived, and even she knew better than to bait the training master. Wilden's eyebrows snapped together. You have been told to mind your manners, Page Neelan. I will have an apology for your insolence. Neelan bowed. An apology for general insolence, your lordship, or some particular offense? 1 week, scrubbing pots, said Lord Wilden. Be silent. Neelan threw out an arm like a player making a dramatic statement. How am I supposed to be silent and still apologize? 2 weeks. Caldry was forgotten now, as Wilden concentrated on the green-eyed boy. The first duty for anyone in service to the crown is obedience. I know, and I'm such a terrible obeyer. All those inconvenient arguments just spring into my mind, and I just have to make them. 3, said Wilden. Neil, shut up. I could learn, Kel squeaked. No one heard. She cleared her throat and said, I can learn on my own. All the boys turned and stared. Wilden glanced at her. What did you say? I'll find my way on my own, said Kel. Nobody has to show me. I'll probably learn better poking around. She knew that wasn't the case. Her father had once referred to the palace as a miserable rat warren, but she couldn't let this mad boy get himself deeper into trouble just for her. Neelan stared at her, his eyebrows raised. When I require your opinion, began Lord Wilden. You know it's no trouble, Nealon said. None at all, Demoiselle Caladre. My lord, I apologize for my wicked tongue and my dreadful manners. I shall do my best not to encourage her to follow my example. Wilden, about to speak, seemed to think better of whatever he was going to say. He waited a moment and then said, You are her sponsor, then. Now, enough time has been wasted on foolishness. Supper. He strode off, pages following like ducklings in their mother's wake. When the hall cleared, only Nealon and Caladry were left. Nealon stared at the girl, his slanting eyes taking her in. Seeing him up close at last, Kel noticed that he had a willful face with high cheekbones and arched eyebrows. Believe me, you wouldn't have liked Jorn as a sponsor, said Nealon. He'd drive you out in a week. With me, at least, you might last a while, even if I am the bottom of Lord Wilden's list. Come on. Kel stayed where she was. Halfway down the hall, Nealon realized that she wasn't behind him. When he turned and he saw her still in front of her room, he gave a sigh and beckoned. Kel stayed where she was. Finally, he stomped back to her. What part of Come On was unclear, Paige? Why do you care if I last a week or longer? She said. Queen's Cove is a ducal house. Midland is just a barony, and a new barony at that. No one cares about Midland. We aren't related. Our fathers aren't friends, so who am I to you? Nealon stared. Direct little thing, ain't ya? Kel crossed her arms over her chest and waited. The talkative boy didn't seem to have much patience. He'd wear out before she did if they were going to have a waiting contest. Nealon sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. Look, you heard me say I lived at court almost all my life, right? Kel nodded. Well, think about that. I've lived at court, and my father is the chief of the realm's healers. I've spent time with the Queen and quite a few of the Queen's riders and the King's champion. I've watched Lady Alana fight for the crown. I saw Her Majesty and some of her ladies fight the Immortals' War. I know women can be warriors. If that's the life you want, then you ought to have the same chance to get it as anybody here. He stopped. Then he shook his head. I keep forgetting I'm not in a university debate. Sorry about the speech. Can we go eat now? Kel nodded again. And this time when he strode off down the hall, she kept up with him. When they passed through an intersection of halls, Nealon pointed. Note that stairwell. Don't let anyone tell you that it's the shortcut to the mess or the classrooms. It heads straight down and it ends up in the lower levels, deep underground. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. Yes, sir. Nealon halted. Was that supposed to be funny? No, sir, said Kel, happy to stop and catch her breath. Nealon walked as he spoke. Nealon threw up his hands and he resumed his walk. Finally, they entered a room that was filled with noise. To Kel, it seemed as if every boy in the entire world was here yelling and jostling around on the long rows of tables and benches. She came to a halt, but Nealon beckoned her to follow. He led her over to stacks of trays with plates, napkins, and cutlery, grabbing whatever he needed. Copying him, Kel soon had a bowl of soup thick with leeks and barley, big slices of ham, a crusty roll that was still hot from the oven, and saffron rice studded with raisins and almonds. She had noticed pitchers of liquids, bowls of fruit, honey, pots, platters of cheese, everything already on the tables. As they stopped, looking around for a place to sit, the noise faded. All eyes turned their way, and within a few seconds she could hear whispers of, Look, the girl, it's her. One clear voice said loudly, Who cares? She's not going to last. Kel bit her lip and looked at her tray. Stone, she thought in Yamini. I am stone. Nealon gave no sign of hearing, but he marched toward seats at the end of one table. As they sat across from one another, the boys closest to them moved. 2 seats next to Nealon were left empty, and 3 next to Kel. Well, this is nice, said Nealon. He put his food on the table in front of him and shoved his tray into the gap between him and the next boy. Usually it's impossible for me to get any elbow room around here. Someone rapped on a table, and Lord Wilden stood alone at a lectern in the front of the room. The boys and Kel got to their feet as Wilden raised his hands. To Mithras, god of warriors and of truth, and to the great mother goddess, we give thanks for their bounty. We give thanks and praise, said the audience. We ask the guidance of Mithras in these uncertain times when change threatens all that is time-honored and true. May the gods' light show us a path back to the virtues of our fathers and an end to uncertain times. We ask this of Mithras, the god of the sun. So mote it be, said the pages. Wilden lowered his hands, and the boys dropped into their seats. Kel, frowning, was a bit less quick to sit. Had Lord Wilden been talking about her? Don't you go letting his prayers bother you, said Nealon, using his belt knife to cut his meat. My dad says he's been doing nothing but whining about changes in Tortle since the king and queen was married. Eat up, it's getting cold. Kel took a couple of bites, and a moment later said, Nealon? He put down his fork. It's Neil. My least favorite aunt calls me Nealon. How did his lordship get those scars? Asked Keldry. And why is his arm in a sling? Neil raised an eyebrow. You don't know? If I knew, I wouldn't ask, thought Kel, but she kept her face blank. Neil looked at her and shook his head and went on. In the war, a party of centaurs and Horrocks. Her what? Said Kel. Horrocks, winged horses, claws, fangs, nasty critters. They attacked the royal nursery, the stump. The what? Said Kel, interrupting again. She felt as if he were speaking a language she didn't understand. Neil sighed. There was a wicked gleam in his green eyes. I call Wilden the stump, 'cause he's so stiff. He might be right, but he also wasn't very respectful, thought Kel. She wasn't going to say so, however. She wasn't exactly sure, but probably it would be just as disrespectful to scold her sponsor, especially since he was 5 years older than she was. Anyway, Lord Wilden fought off the Horrocks and centaurs all by himself. He saved Prince Liam, Prince Jason, and Princess Leanne. In the fight, the Horrocks raked him up a bit. My dad managed to save his arm, but Wilden's going to have pain all his life. He's a hero, then, said Kel, looking up at Wilden with new respect. Oh, he's brave as brave can be, said Neil. Still don't mean he ain't a stump. He fell silent, and Kel concentrated on her supper. Abruptly, Neil said, You aren't what was expected. How so? Asked Kel as she cut up her meat. Well, you're big for a girl. I've got me a 10-year-old sister who's at least a hand shorter than you. And you seem kind of quiet. I guess I thought the girl that would follow in Lady Alana's footsteps would be more like her. Kel shrugged. Will I get to meet the lioness? She tried not to show on her face that she was willing to do almost anything to meet her hero. Neil ran his fork around the edge of his plate, not meeting Kel's eyes. She ain't often at court. Either she's in the field dealing with lawbreakers or immortals, or she's back home with her family. Then a bell chimed, and the pages rose to carry their empty trays to a long window at the back of the room, turning over the dirty things to the kitchen help. Come on, let's get rid of this stuff, and then I'll show you around. Salma found them as they were leaving the mess hall. She pulled Kel aside and gave her 2 keys. One was brass, the other was iron. I'm the only one with copies of these, said Salma quietly. Even the cleaning staff will need me to let them in. Both these keys are special. To open your door, you put the brass one in the lock, turn it to the left, and whisper your name. When you leave, turn the key left again. The iron key is for the bottom set of your shutters. It works the same as your door key. Lock the shutters every time you leave, or the boys are going to break in that way. Leave the small upper shutters open for ventilation. Only a monkey could climb through those. Don't worry if any of the boys can pick locks. Anybody who tries will be sprayed with skunk stink. That ought to make 'em reconsider. Kel smiled. Thank you, Salma. The woman nodded to her and Neil and then left. Neil walked over to Kel. If they can't wreck your room, they'll find other stuff to do, he murmured. When Kel raised her eyebrows at him, he said, I learned to read lips. The masters at the university was always whispering about something. Kel tucked the keys into her belt purse. I'll deal with the other things as they come, she said. Now where to? I'm betting that you would enjoy the portrait gallery. If you're showing visitors around, it's one of the places they always like to go. After leading Kel past a bewildering assortment of salons, libraries, and official chambers, Neil showed her the gallery. He seemed to know a story about every person whose portrait was on display. Kel was fascinated by his knowledge of Tortle's monarchs and their families. He made it sound as though he had known them all personally, even the most ancient of them. She stared the longest at the faces of King Jonathan and Queen Theat. She could see why the queen was called the most beautiful woman in Tortle, but even in the painting there was more to her than her looks. Kel saw humor at the back of those level hazel eyes and determination in the strong nose and perfect mouth. She is so pretty, Kel breathed. Yeah, she is, but don't you go saying that around the stump. He thinks she ruined the country with her chimera notion that women can fight and her opening schools so that everybody can learn their letters. Anything new gives the stump a nosebleed. Still determined to go to war with the training master, Nealon, said a soft, whispery voice. Kelladry whirled, startled, and found that she was staring at an expanse of pearl-gray material as nubby as if it were a mass of tiny beads that had partially melted together. She stumbled back one step, then another. The pearl-gray expanse turned dark gray at the edges. Looking down, Kel saw long, slender legs ending in lengthy digits, each topped with a silver claw. She backed up another step, and she tilted her head most of the way back. The creature in front of her was fully 7 feet tall, not counting the long tail that it used to balance itself, and it was looking at her with fascination. Its large, gray, slit-pupiled eyes looked her over. Kel's jaw dropped. You're staring, Middlin, said Neil. As am I, said the creature. Will you introduce us? Taka, this here's Kelladry of Middlin, said Neil. Kel, Taka is a basilisk. He's also one of our instructors in the ways of immortals. Kel had seen immortals other than the spider-ant on the riverbank, but she had never been so close to one, and he was going to be one of her teachers? We basilisks are travelers and gossips, said Taka. almost like he was reading her mind. I earn my keep here by educating those who desire a more precise knowledge of the immortals that have chosen to settle in the human realm. Yes, sir, said Kel, running out of breath. She started to curtsy, remembered that pages bowed, and tried to do both. Neil braced her before she could fall over. Once she regained her balance, the red-faced Kel gave a proper bow. I am pleased to meet you, Caladry of Middelin, the basilisk said, almost as if he hadn't noticed her clumsiness. I shall see you both the day after tomorrow. With a nod to Kel and Neil, he walked out of the gallery, tail daintily raised. Neil sighed. We better get back to our rooms. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. He led her back to her room, pointing out his own as they went past it. We'll meet in the mess hall in the morning. Kel used the key the way Salma had directed, and she entered her room. Everything was in place. Her bed freshly made up, curtains and draperies all rehung. A faint scent of pine still was drifting from the walls. Gods of fire and ice, bless my new home, Kel whispered. Keep my will burning as hot as the heat of a volcano and as hard and implacable as a glacier. A wave of homesickness suddenly caught her. She wished that she could hear her mother's low, soothing voice or listen to her father reading out from one of his books. Emotion is weakness, Kel told herself, quoting her Yamini teachers. I must be as serene as a lake on a calm day. It was hard to control her feelings when so much was at stake and she was so very far from home. But control her feelings she would. If anyone here thought that they were going to run her off, well, they would find out she was tougher than they expected. Kel was here to stay. To prove it, she carefully unpacked each porcelain Lucky Cat and put it on her mantel. Only when she had placed each of them just right did she scrub her face and put on her nightgown. Climbing into bed, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She imagined a lake, its surface as smooth as glass. This is my heart, she thought. This is what I strive to be. And it's really hard not to break into Be a Man from Mulan right now. Except that would have been more fitting with the Alana books. But yeah, every time it's just the whole being still as a stone thing. I'm like, you must be swift as the coursing. Yeah, anyway, I'm not going to torture you with singing, but now hopefully you guys are all singing Be a Man. Good song. Enjoyed that song. I really liked Mulan. Didn't bother seeing the live action remake because honestly, I think I saw at least two, but they just didn't do it for me. I know that I saw Beauty and the Beast, and it wasn't horrible, and I was really happy that they put at least, I think, one of the songs from the stage musical into the movie musical. But other than that, the cartoon was better. It's probably one of those things that the first thing that you see tends to be the thing that you think of as being right. And so now all of the live action remakes, I'm like, not as good as the cartoon. Also, despite how amazing special effects have become, they still can't match up to the wacky contortions that things can do in a cartoon. Which is why I was a little bit disappointed. I haven't seen the Wheel of Time adaptation, mostly because I don't have any streaming services, so it would be really hard for me to see it. The clips that I've seen on YouTube, they look like they did an okay job. I'm sure that they did as good as they could, but in my mind, to really adapt Robert Jordan, they should have gone with anime or even just a regular American cartoon. I feel like you can go longer form, even though going with streaming services, supposedly you can have longer content, but they still ended up compressing from what I understood. So weird how I go off on ramble tangents. Sorry about that. I was ramble tanging. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed chapter 2. I do love Cal. I mean, I love that, like, Alana's whole shtick was that she was pretending to be a boy, nobody could find out, and Cal's thing so far, at least, seems to be, yeah, I was gonna wear pants to dinner, but no, I'm gonna remind everybody that I am a girl, and I am also going to be a knight. And the two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And in that, I do love Cal for that. I mean, I love Alana too, and all of the other protagonists in the Tamora Pierce books, but I like Kelladry for being very much unapologetically, I'm a girl and I'm gonna kick your butt. Go for it. So, thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter, and I will see you next time.